All right, any second now. Okay, it looks like we're live. This is New World Chaos, and today it's just me. I'm Jeff, and I am here with Ben Appel, who recently wrote an article in Quillet about his experiences growing up Christian, coming out gay, and then kind of getting into the social justice movement and his experience with that as well. So, Ben, I'm gonna just throw it right to you and let you have the floor.
All right. Where would you like me to begin? Just
Well, you talked a little bit about your journey for, I guess, for readers that haven't read the article, maybe a little bit about the background
sure.
and your experience. And then you talked about the journey that it propelled you on from that point, which was, I guess, a few years ago. So maybe you could talk a little about your journey. And just before we went live, you talked about how you're glad that in the midst of it all, when the crisis got really intense, that you didn't shut down and you didn't stop using your critical thinking, and that you're glad that you didn't shut down. So I'm also interested in what allowed you to not shut down. Like, what was the process inside of you that kept you going through all of this? So,
Sure.
and whatever you want to talk about, really, this is your moment. So I'm here to
Thanks, Jeff.
support that.
I really appreciate that. I appreciate you having me on. This, like I said to you before, this is my first time doing something like this. So, hopefully I won't disappoint your audience. And if I'm tripping over my words, just bear with me. But yeah, so for those who haven't read my piece, it's called, it's about, it came out about maybe 4 weeks ago, 5 weeks ago, in Quillette. John Kay was my editor for it. It was fantastic. I pitched him the idea after I left an MFA program, a nonfiction writing MFA program at a Midwestern university. I had kind of, it was, you know, I had kind of just like had it with academia and with what was going on in that realm, and just wanted to write about the fallout about it. I already had written so many things, not published them anywhere, but I had just documented and my experiences and my story, because the kind of stuff I write is like creative nonfiction, personal nonfiction, memoir, that kind of thing, and that's what I went back to school for. So really, where it begins is I do begin with my childhood. I grew up in a fundamentalist Christian community near Baltimore. Um, Everybody lived in the same neighborhood. All the kids went to a very tiny school, um, and my father was one of the five male leaders of the community. They were called coordinators, and the female leaders were called handmaids. It was part of the Catholic charismatic renewal movement that kind of began in the 60s, and then went nationwide and eventually global. And very kind of growing up in a bubble. It wasn't like we were living on a commune, but it was just a very isolated community. There were prayer meetings every week and then smaller prayer groups throughout the week. And it was kind of an interesting blend of Catholicism and Pentecostalism. Very sensational, emotional, like a lot of praying over each other, speaking in tongues, that kind of thing. And so, in the school was very small, and there was a really strong emphasis on really being perfect in the eyes of the Lord. I mean, or at least striving for perfection and goodness, this kind of sin-free way of life. And we were taught to be meek and selfless, and don't get angry, don't be selfish or envious, don't be. It was a very it's just a very, very kind of fundamentalist way of life. And it was a small school, and so we had so much attention from our teachers, who were all very zealous in the religion. And so it was and I grew up in it. It was the only thing I knew. And for the most part, I mean, I had a happy childhood in this community, like, because it was tight knit, and it was what I knew, and I believed, and I wanted to be good and knew how to be good, and that was it. And then when I was 12, my mom decided to leave the community. She had had enough. There were a lot of cracks forming in the foundations of the community. There was a investigation of it by the Catholic Archdiocese for cult-like practices. People came forward, and because of this community was associated with the Catholic Church, I think it had perhaps had the blessing of the Catholic Church. There was, I think, a liaison between, like, one of the coordinators was a practicing priest until last year. So community members came forward and said, look, you know, there's some cult-like stuff going on here. They're teaching things that are heretical to the church. This guy's got one of the leaders has got a God complex. There were questions about what was going on with the tithes, the money that people were contributing to the community every, I suppose, month. I'm not sure. I think it was like 1/10 of your earnings you had to contribute to the community, and there were a lot of questions going on. And then there were other allegations that are still ongoing, and I don't know about what's occurring. I just know that there are, or at least I've heard allegedly that there's just things that went down that people were upset about. But again, I don't know all about that. All I know is what I've seen documented, and have read letters from community members and researched. And then there was an expose in Baltimore Magazine about this. I think they titled, the author titled the article "The Cult Next Door," and it was about the kind of the fallout from this community in the mid 90s. So my mom was really, the community, after initially it had started with this kind of like, born again Christian, former hippies, musicians that just love Jesus and were all about love and forgiveness and mercy and spreading the message of God. And then they linked up with a broader, more fundamentalist organization. I believe the name of it was, there was Word of God and then Sword of the Spirit. And Sword of the Spirit was this broader, in like Ann Arbor, Michigan, I believe it originated, and it was very fundamental. It was all about men's and women's roles. It really took things back, hence, the term handmaids. And so the men were really in charge. Women weren't supposed to wear pants. Men weren't allowed in the delivery rooms when women gave birth, that kind of thing. And it was just very strict. And so slowly but surely, my mom was like, she had joined in the late 70s because she wanted something that was all about love and mercy and forgiveness. She had grown up in the Catholic Church in a very, kind of strict way. And so she had a lot of that Catholic guilt, and she was looking for just a place where people were just about this kind of Christian message of love and mercy, and you're loved and forgiven, no matter what. And that was what really attracted her at the beginning. And then slowly it just became this fundamentalist organization, and she was done. So we left the community abruptly the summer after my 6th grade year. And we were essentially excommunicated. I saw my closest friends that I had known since, one of them since my best friend since infancy, really, just maybe once or twice more. And we were kind of really pushed out. My dad lost his job in the community. He had started another venture in a different field. So, he had something to fall back on. But, we moved into a new county in Maryland and essentially a new life. I went to public school, and I was very effeminate. I was gay. I didn't really know it yet, but I was a super effeminate kid. I had 4 kids in my grade in this community school, and then I went to public school where I guess it was 200 kids in my grade. And from the very beginning, kids, were like, "Are you a boy or a girl?" I was very gender nonconforming. I was very, not to go back on old stereotypes, but I was very athletic. I was myself. There wasn't really an in crowd in the community because it was so small and tight knit. We were all just soldiers for Jesus. So I was never really made aware of how different I was, until I got to this public school. And then it was like, "Are you a boy or a girl?" They called me fag. It was, really, really difficult. So, I'm in this secular world, and my parents split up. So my dad leaves, he moves to another state. Things at home are chaotic. I'm in this new public school. I don't have any of my old mentors and teachers or friends. I'm being bullied, and it was just totally traumatic. I started picking up alcohol, and I started drinking on my own to just to cope. And I developed a form of obsessive compulsive disorder called scrupulosity, which years later I would come to find out that this is what that was. And I would stay up all night, praying, because I was convinced that all the things that were going on in my life were because of me somehow, because I was bad. Um, Perhaps it was because I was gay, because I was starting to realize this. As I'm 12, 13, I'm starting to realize that, you know, I'm entering, I'm in puberty and I'm developing sexual desires, etc. And so I'm thinking, this is me. Um, I didn't know if I had abandoned God or if God had abandoned me. I mean, I was, as long as we were with the community, we were saved. There was salvation. We were good. We were like, heaven was guaranteed. Mercy was there. Um, it was certainly a shame-driven culture because it was a lot about purity policing, but salvation was always at the end of that shame because there was always an opportunity for penance and for salvation as long as we were in this group. And then when we left it, I just didn't have that feeling or that safety anymore. So, um, it became this way to control. I was trying to control the outcome of things by praying, constantly asking God for forgiveness because it turned into, if I don't pray, my mom's going to get killed in a car crash. If I don't pray, et cetera, this kind of this OCD stuff. And it became very ritualistic. It increased to me feeling like I had to do the sign of the cross over and over again. I would have to kneel in my living room at random times during the day. I would have to eventually had to leave class in the middle of class, run to the bathroom, and then get on my knees and start praying. And I would want to go into the stall, but I thought, well, if I go into the stall, then I'll be ashamed of my Christian faith, which is a sin. So I have to stay out here in this main area of the bathroom and just like hope, in the back of my mind that someone doesn't walk in and see me kneeling on the floor praying, doing the sign of the cross over and over again. And it got really intense. And so, I self-medicated with alcohol. And in high school, it got worse and worse. And I ended up, smoking pot, which really helped with the symptoms. But then, that really turned on me. It became an everyday habit. And I became fully addicted to pot. And I was a daily user. By my senior year, or junior year really, but my senior year, I was using heavier substances. And then I graduated from high school, went to college for a semester in Maryland. And then at the end of that semester, my mental health had deteriorated so badly that I decided to drop out. And I was going to go, find myself. I was going to travel. I was just going to. And in that February, I went to Mardi Gras, New Orleans, as one does to find oneself. And I'm lucky I came home alive. It was just a party, and I went on a really huge cocaine binge while I was down there. And 2 weeks later, it kind of set me off on this manic episode. I had a complete psychotic break about 2.5 weeks after I got home from New Orleans. I was involuntarily hospitalized in the local psych ward for a week.
What year was this?
This was in 2002, in the beginning of 2002. I was 19. So, I was there for a week. They diagnosed me with, I left after a week. I went home. My mom in the basement of her home, there's this bedroom with no windows. So it's just completely pitch black all day long. And I just went into this cave of a room and just slept as much as I could. And eventually my body just would run out of need for sleep. And I was dreadfully suicidal. I couldn't be in my own skin. The anxiety, the panic attacks, it was excruciating. And I would just pray, like, please help me not to wake up. And then finally I was like, well, I gotta do it. I gotta end this. So I went upstairs looking through medicine cabinets to find something that I could take. And then I don't know what happened, but I went upstairs to my mom's bedroom. She was sleeping, and I woke her up and I said, I'm going to kill myself. I need to go back to the hospital. So she drove me back, and I was there for another week. They got me on some good anti-anxiety meds, which really helped. They also diagnosed me with schizophrenia from the beginning because, here I am. I have the psychotic break. I'm 19, which, as far as I remember or recall or understand, that can be the common age when, first psychotic symptoms or breaks happen in relation to an eventual, schizophrenic diagnosis. And so, and I was talking about, like, because my OCD and drugs I was using, I had, was smoking pot every day, using hallucinogens, like, there were, what part of OCD and scrupulosity in particular, there's a symptom called intrusive thoughts. A lot of people have them, but with intrusive thoughts, like, because I was so obsessed with being perfect and pure, because I was so just constantly obsessed with my moral fiber and asking forgiveness or just being good, not having bad thoughts, because I was trying to control that so much, suddenly a sexual image would come in my head. Or if I was praying, which I always, so much of the time was, suddenly I would think of, like, a big throbbing penis, or, like, just whatever. And so all of these, intrusive thoughts often happen at the most inopportune times. And so it would just kind of come into my brain, and, eventually it was like an intersection of really kind of odd mix of religious and sexual imagery. And so I would kind of feel like, I would imagine kind of like serpents coming out of my heart, or, it was a very kind of William Blake-ish, vibe to it. And so here I am saying, I'm picturing these things. And so they kind of read that as these hallucinations, which are symptoms of schizophrenia. And they just kind of diagnosed me, pumped me with antipsychotic medication, and kind of set me on my way. I did an outpatient therapy, and I went into NA and then AA, 12-step programs. And that year was a chaotic year. I ended up shooting heroin. I had a couple more psych ward stays. It was bad. Then I was drinking all day, every day. And then a year later, I'm going to speed up this story, I fell into a cosmetology apprenticeship to become a hairdresser. I mean, it was just like, so I was fired from my restaurant job. My mom kicked me out of the house for a short while, and I ran into someone I knew from high school, and she was like, come do this. Ironically, she was leaving a cosmetology apprenticeship to go do youth ministry full time. She's, like a Christian. Yeah. So she said, do you want to take my place? And I said, and I'd always been artistic. I had always been into beauty, because, like, I thought in my mind, like, perhaps I'll do this one day. Although I always thought about going back to school at some point, university. And so I said, sure. I mean, I think I was drunk I know that I was high, and I believe I was drunk when she ran into me at the grocery store. And I said, okay. And she picked me up. I mean, it might have even been the next day. And so for 3 months at this job, I am, like, trying to blow dry clients' hair. I mean, I didn't know what I was doing. I was falling asleep in the pedicure chairs. I would show up high, or I wouldn't show up at all. I was constantly being written up. And then one day, a few months after I started, a young woman came in to, getting her hair done, and my boss was doing her hair, and I'm blowing out this client's hair. And I overhear her talking to my boss about her recovery. She's like, I've been clean and sober for 6 months. And my, ears perked up, and she went outside to go smoke a cigarette, and I followed her outside, and I said, I need help. By that time, my using was just, bong hits and big cups of my mom's boxed wine that I would have. I mean, I would just chug it and watch TV and then just pass out, scribble angrily in my journal. And I was a mess. And that was really what my life became. She took me to a 12-step meeting that night, and I ended up getting sober. So I was just ready, and that was what, my life really began. And fast forward, I became a successful stylist. I was a very busy and successful stylist in the Baltimore, D.C. area. I really developed a lucrative career there, all the while thinking I do want to go back to school, but life just kind of got in the way. I developed a relationship, then that relationship ended. I moved out on my own. I'm supporting myself, and then, but I wasn't completely happy in the industry. It was very stressful. Um, Especially for someone that doesn't know how to set boundaries with people very well, So I then in 2011, I met my now husband in August of 2011. And prior to meeting him, I was like, I don't believe in marriage. It's an antiquated institution. You know, I don't really even think that long-term relationships are possible for gay men in a traditional, like, I was very much just inclined to like live my life single, and I was actually pretty happy about it. I was experiencing this kind of independence and this comfort in my own skin that I had never really felt before. I was 28 at the time. And I met him, and everything changed. Within a few months, we were in love, and I was like, and meanwhile, in Maryland, in early 2012, the Maryland state legislature passed marriage equality, and then there was conservatives in the state created a referendum to put the issue on the ballot that November in the November general election. So I got involved with campaigning for marriage equality that year because I kind of finally had, selfishly, I mean, I had a skin in the game. I thought, because my now husband and I said 2 months after we were dating, I said to my best friend, I was like, I can actually really see myself marrying this guy. And so it was just like a switch, and the campaign was successful. Maryland was one of the first 3 states in the country that election day to approve marriage equality at the ballot box by popular vote. And I mean, I didn't have a huge hand in it, but I had a hand in it, and it really it was transformative for me. I wanted to keep chasing that feeling. I was so convinced we were going to lose. I was like, there's no way. And to win, it was so validating. It was like, I mean, I would love to say that my, self-worth or the way that I saw these things didn't depend upon popular opinion. But to grow up, to be born in the 80s, to grow up with the AIDS crisis, with the moral, the Christian right, the moral majority, and just to be constantly receiving this messaging that the majority of people viewed me as this kind of irredeemable sinner, to see that demonstrated in an opposite way, I suddenly was really kind of walking with my head held a little bit higher, and I wanted to keep chasing that feeling. That kind of, I was on fire for social justice. So soon after that, there was a campaign for a transgender rights legislation in the state. I got a little bit involved with that, electioneered, and spoke with senators about approving that measure. And that was when my husband and I got married in 2014. And 2 months after we got married, I said, I want to go back to school. I want to do journalism, be a writer, work in human rights, whatever. There's more that I want to do. And he said, you just need to go for it. So I went to school part-time for a year at community college while working full-time. And then after a year, I was accepted to Columbia. Columbia in New York has a school called the School of General Studies for non-traditional students. So it initially was for veterans in the post-World War II years, for vets whose education was interrupted by their service. They would get this Columbia education, and then it eventually opened up to all non-traditional and returning students who have had gaps in their education. And the great thing about this program is that it's one of the 4 schools, the undergraduate schools at Columbia, and you're matriculated in. So you get the traditional Columbia, education, this Ivy League experience, and it was a dream come true. I was accepted to this university. We moved up to New York, and I began in January. Trump was elected in late 2016. I was really devastated by that, and it was a dark period. And but I thought, well, at least I'm going to this liberal haven, this blue wonderland. I can be locked inside this liberal bubble with like-minded folks for 3.5 years of my life, and fight, hashtag resist, and really get involved and like do the work rather than just penning angry diatribes on Facebook. I can like actually learn and get involved, and I did from the beginning. I did. It was a really incredible experience, but then things just eventually took a dark turn, and that was where we are. I apologize for that long-winded. I don't know how to make that short.
I'm glad you didn't make it short. I am so touched by your story. Like, it parallels mine in so many places, like almost point for point. And just to know that there's somebody else out there that had similar experiences, then I'm so moved. I'm thank you for sharing that and telling it. Um, you're in New York, you're in the liberal bubble. Trump got elected. What it seems like the dark times were just beginning, or there were more dark times ahead.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I
So far,
remember.
it's taken kind of a classic. It's very similar to mine. It's kind of a classic growing up gay, not having rights, fighting for rights, getting rights, and then thinking that okay, you've made progress and the future's open and more favorable to you. And then something happened, like something really strange happened over the last few years.
Yeah, you know, with Trump's election, I, you know, let's say my love story with Drew, and with my husband, this life we built together, um, you know, paralleled a lot of the advances in LGBTQ rights that were going on, particularly gay rights. So with marriage equality, it was like this kind of really what to me felt, in a kind of this great, and if I'm thinking, grandiosely, it kind of was, it felt very divinely inspired to just kind of for me to meet him, and then to kind of have all of these great, uh, uh, just really pivotal achievements in the gay rights movement. So when Trump wins, and I'm here's Pence, as his running mate, and I'm thinking, oh my God, this is all going to be taken away, or I just I was so afraid, I was so afraid to, and I think perhaps harkening back to like what it felt like in 2012 when we won that campaign, to think that the majority of them, well, actually not the majority of Americans, if we're looking at but a very large amount of Americans voted for him, who at the time to me kind of epitomized, uh, I don't know. I mean, at least his administration, what it was coming to be, this kind of anti-gay, anti-progressive, anti-liberal, in a way. I mean, it's so confused now, but
About Trump's
yeah,
administration.
yeah. So
And well,
when,
one
so
of the
when,
first things he did was the trans ban in the military too. Like,
right,
if we had any fears at all, he confirmed them almost right away with that.
right. So it was heartbreaking. Um, so that's what I did. I went to Columbia. I took classes. I took a contemporary Islamic civilization class, so that I could learn more about the Muslim world and about Islam. And I took a readings in human rights course, and in that course, I researched the history of the anti-gay movement, particularly in regards to like the moral majority and the Christian right, starting with like Anita Bryant and the Save Our Children campaign, and how we've gotten to from there to now. And then I turned that into an op-ed that was published on HuffPost, and then I wrote for Columbia's Daily Spectator. They have a weekly magazine called The Eye, where I wrote a piece about the stigmatization of gay men who are HIV positive. Long piece that was really great. Well, I mean, that I enjoyed doing and that I was for the most part happy with. But I mean, it was just, and I interviewed Jennifer Finney Boylan, who is a trans rights activist, and she was the chair of GLAAD at the time, and she is the writer in residence at Barnard at Columbia. And I interviewed her and wrote a profile of her for Columbia's magazine, and and then I worked for GLAAD over the summer, 2017, and I was an intern for them, a news and rapid response intern. So yeah, I just got really involved from the beginning, and I don't really know when things, as I detail in this essay for Colette, I mean, you read it. It's like there were just little things that started to occur where there was some kind of like disconnect. I started, I guess what I'll say is in, a short format, it's like I started to see parallels between the cult of my childhood, this kind of the purity policing, the scrupulosity, the groupthink, the shame culture. I started to see parallels between what was occurring on campus and that. And I don't know if I really would have put it into those words at the time, but what I do know is that, for lack of a better word, like this triggered all of these old symptoms of this OCD and this scrupulosity that had never fully gone away, but had gotten considerably better over the years with mental health treatment and being sober, and but it became so real and so intense that I just started to notice that there was something really off with the way, to me, that I thought the people around me were approaching social justice and actually achieving progress. To me, it seemed like there were so many things that were being said and done that just intrinsically in my gut felt like they were antithetical to like what people were trying to do. And it was such a cognitive dissonance for me. I felt like I was slowly losing my mind because I'm being asked to kind of go along with, or at least okay or not along with ideas that not just seemed antithetical, but even, I'll say it, like anti-racist ideas that actually seemed like low-key racism to me, that seemed like, and I just thought, and then, there was this kind of like undercurrent of a new kind of homophobia that I saw occurring, where suddenly, like, because I'm a kind of traditionally masculine, presenting person or gay, I'm kind of, there's all these like kind of things assumed about me, about my political ideologies, about what I think, how I've lived, I say this in the essay, the reason why I'm more masculine now and more gender conforming, I suppose, is really just this kind of like natural evolution. I mean, as I've gotten older, I just feel I've become more of a man. I feel more of like a, masculinity, or at least traditional masculinity, just feels like kind of intrinsic or inherent. Perhaps it's biology, perhaps it's social conditioning, I don't know. But another reason was, I was bullied. Like, this gender nonconformity was bullied, out of me. I mean, I did everything I could to kind of completely eradicate, femininity from me. And not that I wasn't a strong feminist, not that I didn't have so many, but as just a survival tactic, I kind of picked up on these cues that if I oh, when I say I'm so pissed, like, if I say, oh, I'm so pissed, if I say like in a faggy way, then I'm going to be bullied and beaten up or possibly beaten up. So, okay, amends. Oh, my voice is too high. I need to deepen it. Oh, people think my hair I'm playing with my hair too much. I'm going to cut it short. Um, my clothes, my shorts are too short. I'm going to wear baggy clothes. Like it was a survival tactic that began at 12 and 13. So then to kind of, to grow up and and to experience all of these things and to be this, and then to kind of starting to hear myself labeled as this term cis and cisgender. And then even in a very, I started to kind of hear it in this kind of pejorative manner where it was almost like an insult. I've said this before, but
Toward
people
you?
started to, with that.
Toward you? Like they were thinking you were cis? They were
Well, they
categorizing
would,
you?
yeah. So if people would say like, oh, you're a cis gay, or like, people would
Cis?
sarcastically say something like, oh, like another cis gay male, what a cis gay male thing to say, which I state in this essay. It's like, um, you know, people were calling me cis in the same cadence that the seventh graders in middle school were calling me fag. That's what it felt like. It felt like it was just this new weird iteration of an attack on my gender identity, which I'm just me. Like I'm not, I'm an out gay man, and and my interpersonal ideas about gender and about conformity versus nonconformity. I mean, it's a personal thing. It's something that I love thinking about. I've studied a lot of the histories of gender and sexuality, so it's something that totally fascinates me. But suddenly to see people kind of like weaponizing this, and to feel kind of a little bit targeted, it was just a bizarre experience. There were all these things that kind of just slowly started to occur, and I became suicidal at Columbia. I eventually was as suicidal as I was when I was 19. For the first time in nearly 20 years, or I guess 15, 17 years, I was in such a dark place, and I didn't know what was going on. I was still seeing my therapist. And I would speak about my experience at Columbia and about my experience like viewing this stuff and thinking, and um and I guess what really changed things was there was another guy in school, and I don't mention this in my essay. Another guy in the same program as me that started the same semester in January 2017, and he was a cult survivor of a different denomination. It was I don't know, to protect his anonymity, I'm not going to say specifically what the religion was, but he was a cult survivor, and he wanted to study these things. And when I would talk with him, he's a really brilliant guy, and I would kind of just say things because I knew that I could, I felt like I could trust him, or he was just such a kind guy, and I felt like with our backgrounds, we actually even grew up we lived in the same area, but we didn't, we weren't in the same world at all, but which was interesting. So we had that in common as well. But he started kind of articulating, or these ideas that we were bouncing off of each other. There was like, okay, I don't feel so alone. And then I'll say, he eventually, I think it was 2018, he sends me this, meanwhile, I've spent so much time in these classrooms where I feel like it's just all about, this very weird distillation, this reduction of identity politics. And it doesn't matter what's said, it only matters who said it. And it was so, again, antithetical to intellectual development, to the progression of thought, to like true kind of diversity of thought. And Megan Daum, a writer who I've gotten to know, and has been sort of like a mentor to me in the years since then. She was she taught in Columbia's MFA program, and she's a writer now. She has a podcast called you know, Unspeakable, and she wrote this story, this long essay called Nuance, a Love Story. I think that's what it was called, like my intellectual affair with, or my love affair with the intellectual dark web. And in this essay, and I had known Dom's work. She's a great writer, but she had never written anything like this, where she kind of just has this catharsis of like, okay, here's where I am. This is this dissonance here. I see stuff going down that's really crazy. That there's this disconnect between liberalism and between whatever this new progressivism is becoming. People have lost their minds since Trump, and people have, you know, and I felt like for the first time I wasn't insane. I felt like, oh, okay, I'm not alone. And that was kind of like, I think, the gate that kind of really pushed open for me to just, you asked before, like, how did I, you know, and I stated before we started live, I'm so grateful that I didn't shut down, that I didn't just go with it, that I wasn't bullied into kind of submission to kind of, I can only think one way and I'm just going to go along with it. Like that I still was able to exercise my critical thinking. And you asked like, okay, how was I able to do that? And honestly, a huge part of it is my age. Like there is a huge advantage of going back to a university and getting a university education after you've lived a life, when you're in your 30s, when you have perspective, when you have life experiences. Whereas when you're young, you know, not to sound super hyperbolic about it, but so much of what these schools are now, it's a lot of education and it's a lot of indoctrination, just period. And so for me to be in this kind of indoctrination world and to kind of like say, this feels similar, you know, oh, I've experienced this before, or this looks like, and to kind of draw from my broader experience of just being an older person, that was a huge advantage for me. And I also just, I don't know what it was. I mean, I guess that was a big advantage. And then otherwise it was just like, you know, finding, again, like reading the right thing at the right time, finding people that I could trust and talk to, and then hearing other people's experiences. You know, I will say there was a guy that in my same school that I ran into one time, and completely unrelated to anything. He said, I started having panic attacks in classes, and I didn't know this guy. And I said, what's going on? And he explained a situation where he was called out for a transgression that wasn't a transgression at all, and that it was so alarming. And the professor didn't do anything to protect him. All the professor did was afterwards email him privately and say, I don't agree with what went down. I'm sorry that happened, but did nothing. And so he was like, I'm starting to have panic attacks in class because I'm afraid this is going to happen again. It was so humiliating. And so, and it was an unprompted. So I started to kind of be like, okay, I'm not crazy and I'm not alone. And what this forced me to do, and I detail this in the essay, is that it got so bad and I got to such a dark place that I finally ended up doing intensive trauma therapy. So my experience at Columbia led me right into what was called EMDR, eye movement desensitization, reprocessing, I believe it stands for. And I found an old friend of mine had been recommending this form of therapy ever since she had heard about my past and my upbringing, and all of the symptoms that I would still experience. She had been recommending this to me because she was a social worker, a licensed clinical social worker, and one of her colleagues had performed this service for people, and evidently it was really successful. And then finally it got so badly that I experienced the worst panic attack that I experienced in 20 years. And I, on the first night of my fall semester of my last year there, and I didn't think I was going to be normal. I didn't think I was going to make it. I mean, it was for 3 days. I was completely, for 2.5 days, I was really out of commission with that. And so, I'm doing this. I did a year of intensive trauma therapy, and it was really a game changer. It was really a game changer. So
And
that
was
was
it
what.
all due to your experiences of going to Columbia?
hmm Yeah. So
That's
what it did was, like I said to you before, this experience at Columbia, and in what's going on in the broader culture, you know, exacerbated by social media and by just what's happening, what we see happening. But of course, at school, um, re-triggered these these old this old scrupulosity of, and I was in a mental space where that I had that I was in when I left this religious cult of my childhood. Of course, I'm older now. I have more, I'm knock on wood, or at least hopefully more intelligent and more evolved since then. But it was the same symptoms that were coming up, and I'm still sober, so I wasn't going to drink over it or use drugs over it. I didn't have that opportunity anymore, but I was really deteriorating, and so that was what led to it.
that yeah, that matches my experience. That's what I don't want to say when I started interacting, I grew up in Louisiana. I grew up around a lot of Christians. Most of my life was spent around Christians. And that's what this feels like. It's like, oh, I remember this from growing up with Christians. It's the same tactics, it's the same kind of logical or illogical evasions and maneuvers. I couldn't pinpoint it or articulate it, but something subjective about the experience was very much almost identical to the experience of interacting with Christians. And that's kind of the first thing that put it on my radar, too. You mentioned it's because you were older, and I didn't think about this either, but we're also gay, and we're used to like people trying to put us in boxes and us resisting. So there's that, too. Were there other gay or older people in your program as well that were having similar experiences? Like, is that enough to kind of inoculate people from this, or are there older gay people also kind of falling for this or getting drawn into it that maybe don't exhibit that immunity that we have?
Yeah. Um, so one of my closest friend at the school, who I met my first semester there, who was he is a gay black man, and he is older than me, actually, and he has he's lives in New York, and he we he was actually, yeah. So he's on a similar wavelength. I mean, I'll say that if I've shared with him some of my writing and the conversations we've had, he's been like, you need to say this out loud. Like, you need to say this stuff. You need to write it down, because this is and he's articulated, from his perspective, the same thing. So that was a huge deal as well. I mean, having him to talk to and to feel safe with, and absolutely. So yes, I don't know if if every older gay person that comes into a world like that would have the same reaction. Possibly they would kind of fall into, and kind of just go along with that kind of thinking. But I would speculate that more often than not, the reaction would be, at least from mature gay people in that atmosphere, more of a response that I ended up having, that my friend ended up having, and that, yeah, like you said, this kind of being gay, growing up gay, also during the era that we grew up, and um, understanding how far we've come, to know, like you said, to always be kind of taught to think, to be put in a box, and to, there's this aversion and there's this natural, perhaps, inclination to fight that, if Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's very hard to convince me that I'm not something that I know I am, like, or that I'm something that I know I'm not. It even as a kid, that was always the resistance for me is I couldn't fit in the box even if I tried because I'm not that thing. I can't. So it wasn't really even rebellion. It was kind of this natural. It was reality, resisting a false reality. But you said something else that was interesting to me. You said when you went to Columbia, you were kind of how did you say it? You were attacked for your gender again, or something like that. And the way I've been conceptualizing it is there's homophobia growing up from the rednecks in the South, and then I move up here to Washington State with the liberals, and it's androphobia from the feminists and the liberals. So I think that one part of my identity is being attacked by one group, and then there's a different part that's being. But I think you're right. It's like it's the same thing. It's just being reacted to differently by different groups, but they're not attacking two different things. They're attacking the same thing, and it's our gender, our sexual, or whatever you call gay, and what makes us gay. But both sides seem to have a problem with it now. Like one side seemed to there was almost nothing negative about being gay up until a few years ago. If somebody thought to criticize or question somebody, um, all the feminists would jump in on them. All the groups now that are kind of marginalizing us would jump to our defense because gay was a good thing, and you don't question, you don't attack it, you protect it. We get marriage. I don't know if in their mind we got absorbed into the establishment or became part of, but at that moment, suddenly we became what you said, cis gay, which I don't even know what that is. That's so subjective. How would one person cis is another person's gay? Where do you even put the line? But we became something different in their mind, and then they just went rabid. They just started like I became this evil white, what is it, toxic masculinity white patriarch male, which I don't even know what that is. But all of a sudden, all these people that had been helping me get gay marriage were attacking me for what I thought was a different identity. But I think it's the same thing. There's something about us that rubs different people different ways.
Mhm.
Still, like we got marriage, but we didn't get full acceptance because now we're being marginalized by another group.
Well, I think what I've come to learn and what I wasn't really aware of in years past was that that the fight for marriage equality in the gay community, if you will, in the gay and lesbian community, was never a unifying, um, like it was a platform that never unified. Like there was always dissent amongst gay and lesbian people who would say the solution is not to improve acceptance, is not to like kind of fall in with this heteronormative kind of this template and this way of life, and not to assimilate to what exists, but to rebel against it, to be a counterculture, to break it down, to live a different way. There was an intrinsic intersection and overlap between the gay rights movement and feminism. I mean, starting in the 70s, they went hand in hand. And so in a lot of ways, like the kind of old gay rights and gay and lesbian rights is kind of like fundamentally feminist in a lot of ways. With that,
What happened? Like we became
so
scary males at some point, or oppressive males at some point, after
yeah,
years and years of this close allyship.
so I do think that, um, not to sound too Jordan Peterson about this, but there's a in recent years, or for years now, I guess. I mean, like I think her name Christina Hoff Sommers. She wrote a book
Yeah.
about this back in the '90s. The kind of the war on boys, or a book like that. But and again, this is something that I wasn't really aware of, but this kind of, you know, I still consider myself a feminist. I mean, I'm just fundamentally a liberal person. I if a woman presents an idea to me, I listen to it, and I I think about it. If I'm speaking with a one, it's just the same experience to me as then with the man. It's just always been that way. And who knows? Perhaps it's because I was pretty much raised by a single mother. I have two older sisters. I always had close female friends. It was just, I'm a gay man. I don't know. Maybe it was just the era I grew up in, but it's just always how I've thought. But there is, just like with any kind of activist rights movement, there's 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 fallout. There's a third kind of undercurrent of, um, well, I don't know. What I do know is that along with huge advances in women's rights and in feminism, there's also a kind of a, at the same time, a backlash or against just traditional masculinity and traditional, um, uh, this kind of idea of the patriarchy being, men are responsible for kind of every bad thing that occurs on the planet, and so I think that's part of it. I think that is, we're not excluded from that just because we're gay.
But we were for so long. But most of
We
my life,
were.
we were. I've always seen gay rights as a men's, or homosexual as a men's rights issue, and I think it's something that men didn't deal with back then. So it left us, like, the women were all we had. That's all we had. That's the only people that were. But it should have been something that men kind of work out for themselves, because we're men. We're all part of men, and we kind of just got. I don't know. We didn't get integrated into the male society, whatever. Had that happened then, I don't know what I'm trying to say. I'm trying to say that it was a men's, it should have been a men's rights issue, and I don't think the men were ready to tackle it or knew what to do with it. So it just kind of got left to the women to deal with, and I think it was to their disadvantage. I think had they taken responsibility for it as a men's issue and got involved in a solution decades ago and helped us make the progress. And by the way, this is not all men, because now that I'm thinking about it, most of my allies were heterosexual men in the gay rights movement, in my personal life. And there were so many of them that I would not have made the progress I had or even be here today without. So it's not like it was just women that was helping me, now that I think about it. But had there been more male support for it earlier on, which I think the lesbians got in the lesbian community, I feel like they had more heterosexual female support. Like the feminists saw it, they saw lesbianism as a feminist issue, and I guess the males did not. And had they, the current situation we're in as gay men might have been a little different. I don't know, but I do say I think now at this point they're catching up. I feel much more accepted by men. I feel like homosexuality is less of a barrier for forming relationships with men now. So I feel like I can go back and make all that up. I don't know where I was ultimately going with this, but there it is so far. That's what I got so far.
Yeah, I mean, in the past few years, some of the closest relationships and bonds that I formed have been with straight men. It's completely platonic. It's interesting.
Yeah. I just wish, and now that we're all being demonized, it's kind of like, just like we were kind of forced to ally with, not forced, but they were our natural allies back then. It seems like men are now, like all men are natural allies with each other, as long as there's this ambient androphobia out there. I've said for a while that androphobia seems like the one accepted form of discrimination, like societally accepted. Homophobia, bad, transphobia, bad, all of that. But androphobia seems tolerated even in these progressive circles. I was in a conversation the other day with some people saying that very thing, and they said, well, you don't understand what it's like to be alone in an elevator with a man. Like if you walk to an elevator and there's just a single man in there, you're justified in feeling threatened or uncomfortable, whatever. And I said if there were a transsexual in the elevator, that would be transphobia if you said that. If there were a black person in the elevator, that would be racism, what you just said. But because it's a male in the elevator, we have to be understand. They said you don't understand women's issues. You need to be more understanding of what women go through to understand why it's okay for them to be afraid of a male in an elevator. And I said, but that doesn't apply to any other group. Why is androphobia still okay? Racists have to get over their fear of black people and ride in elevators with them. Straight people have to get over their fear of transsexuals and ride in. Why do women still get to say, "Ooh, it's a creepy, scary man. I don't want to get in the elevator with him"? That's stigmatizing to men.
Yeah, I mean, I'm like fundamentally, I guess a fundamentalism that I still practice or that I still observe is that, this kind of liberal idea and discrimination isn't right in any sense. Like I think some people say now that like the solution to discrimination is more discrimination. I don't agree with that. Like I don't think that to correct things that certain groups need to be discriminated about against to make progress. I think that it needs to happen another way because it's it's fundamentally illiberal and it's foundationally antithetical to like the founding principles of like this country and to a liberal society. And so yeah, what you're talking about there is this kind of like when is it okay to discriminate against groups? And I just don't think that it's ever okay. Yeah.
Do you, other than conversations like this and trying to kind of keep those bridges going to as many different groups as possible that are not in alignment with you or different from you or whatever, other than that, what other solutions do you see or things that you think might help us steer this moment in a different direction that we as
I mean,
individuals?
we as individuals. So, you know, someone so much of this is fueled, I think, by social media. Maybe you'll agree. I don't know. I mean, I think that, people say that like Twitter isn't real life. And I agree with that. However, Twitter and the media are essentially the same things now. I mean, you read an article in the New York Times, it's like Twitter, they are actually quoting things from Twitter or Twitter,
All my news
it's,
comes from Twitter. I don't go to any other
well,
site.
and whether or not someone is on Twitter, they are getting a Twitter spun news story. They're getting a Twitter and social media, but Twitter influenced because Twitter is so influential in mainstream media and in popular opinion because very influential people are on this platform and they state something and then something becomes slightly viral or trending according to certain people, and it becomes a news story and influences what CBS or NBC or CNN or whoever is reporting. And so it's becoming more like real life. And I've said this before, the kind of church of social justice, particularly in academia, this kind of, a lot of the kind of propaganda, if you will, and the ideas are being disseminated through social media, faster than any, church in the past could ever disseminate any kind of religious belief or dogma. I mean, it's just completely there, academia is everywhere now. Academia is in everybody's home, essentially. People thought that these ideas would just remain sequestered to college campuses, and that's not the case now. So Twitter in a lot of ways is becoming like more like real life. And so I think that, someone stated recently, I saw someone write, and I agree with this, that, the people that argue on Twitter, 99% of the time, if you were meeting in person, you could actually get along and be kind and respectful to one another, especially if it was in one-on-one people are speaking through the safety of their computer screens and their phone screens, and they're not connecting one-on-one with people. There's all this like idea of like choose empathy, and yet it's this kind of weird technologically engineered form of empathy that only happens through the computer screen. It's like whereas empathy comes from actual human connection and like understanding someone one-on-one. So I think storytelling is really important, getting to know people individually. I'm lucky because as a hairstylist for so many years, I was doing hair for people from all walks of life, from all political backgrounds, from all backgrounds. And so I formed close, really intimate relationships with I had one of the clients that stays out of my mind was a conservative from Florida pastoral counselor, and she wasn't from Florida, she's now in Florida, pastoral counselor who extremely conservative. I know for a fact that she signed the referendum in Maryland to get gay marriage on the ballot to overturn the Maryland state legislature's, legalization of gay marriage. And I would do her hair every 4 weeks, and we would talk about our lives, and we would talk about ideas, and I would told her about my childhood, and she told me about her marriage and this and that. And after 6 years of doing her hair, not that that is how long it took, but I mean, we forged a bond. And she wasn't my favorite person in the world. She still kind of triggered me in some ways, if you will. But she brought me a wedding gift after I came back from my honeymoon, and she would talk about my marriage. She would use the words marriage in relation to her own marriage. And so I don't know if I changed her mind about anything, but she got to know me as an individual and as a human being. And so there's that is one thing too. And then just being honest and speaking up. Like, I'm so lucky that I was able to get a platform like on Colette. They gave me the space to write all these words just to tell my story. And, it was a cathartic experience. And, but I've received countless messages and emails from people thanking me for writing this and for saying like, thank you for saying the things that I've been afraid to say. And they all say like, keep writing, keep doing this. And so I think, okay, people just need to get honest and be daring and bold enough to say, not just from a really kind of reactionary or taunting, I can't think of the word right now, way, but from just a personal experience, sharing their story and their experience like you did tonight with me, or that I'm doing with you, where it's like, this is why I think this way. There's a reason. There's a reason why my experience has been this, and there's a reason why I feel uncomfortable with the way you're approaching this issue, and that I'm kind of like, feeling like avoiding it a little bit or butting heads with you because, and rather than, thinking that anybody that disagrees with the broader social justice narrative is a sinner, is a heretic, is to say, okay, why? And then to kind of have these conversations where you kind of ultimately often realize that you are still on the same page. It's just, we have to get each other to think in different ways about things. And that's, maybe that's a little bit of a grudge now that I say that again, that I have against a lot of activists now, is that they're so headstrong on making people think, not just think differently about things, but just accept that everything is different, that, that you have to think completely differently about gender, about race, about anything. And for people to just kind of accept it and say, okay, I'm going to now see the world and see life and even my own experience and my own self and my own identity through this lens that you have, that you are thrusting upon me. Absolutely, no problem. Okay, so not an issue. And then if there's the slightest amount of pushback and like, I actually think that this might be a little bit, then it's just immediate accusations of one of the big capitalized whether you're transphobic or a racist or sexist or whatever you are, if there's any kind of slight, not even pushback, but just conversation and dialogue and question about maybe this isn't the best way, because I'm with you. Like there's I do believe in equality, but where you're going seems a little bit not based in reality to me, or seems a little bit regressive as opposed to progressive. And I'm not the only one that thinks it. If you think that too, you're not the only one. Professors say this to me, in at Columbia and at, I mean, these conversations are occurring and going on, and I think that people are just, it's so much easier to turn off your brain and just to go along with what's being said and what's being stated. Um, and it's unfortunate, but people are doing that. They're not pressing the issue.
What you had mentioned all the people you were hearing from, and you had shared with me earlier a few of the more interesting people that you've received responses from about the article.
Right. Well, I will say, there was a, yeah, I mean, it's been overwhelming. It's been like so kind. I mean, the people's stories that they have, just very emotional and very, it's been really moving. And as scared as I was to put myself out there, and I was scared, like super, super scared. Um, you know, it made it totally worth it. Like the moment that I got, and I wasn't expecting that at all, but the moment I got a first response from someone with this heartfelt email, I was like, honestly, this is like specifically why I wrote this, because I know that some things that I've read or some people I've heard or talked to saved me during these darkest moments. And so to think that I might have been able to do that for other people is just a great thought. But yeah, like I stated to you before, people all across the political spectrum. And I received messages from people that I never would have thought would be sending me, messages of appreciation for something I wrote. One in particular from a senior staffer at a major conservative, I'll say, focus on the family, which you were stating your experience with that organization. And for me personally, I grew up seeing that publication in the houses of all the Lamb of God members. I remember one of my earliest encounters with the gay lifestyle, if you will. I was about 9 or 10, and I was at a friend's house, and there was an issue of Focus on the Family there. And I don't remember if his mother showed it to me or if we were looking at it together, but there was an article in there with images from a gay pride parade. And there were these two bare gays in leather, like holding hands or maybe, even kissing, I can't remember. And like balloons were on a float or something. And it was all about this, like the dangers of this evil, movement of sodomites and pedophiles and et cetera. And I remember just feeling like, oh my gosh, like it was so in my face, how sinful and how bad these people were. And I'll never forget that. That was like just such an early programming, and to
Were you aware at the time that it
that I was
applied to you?
gay? No, not necessarily. No, I was too young. I mean, maybe I can't remember if there was perhaps some kind of, but I wasn't yet. I was just getting ready to enter puberty. I wasn't realizing that was even on the. I don't think I even knew what sex was at that point. So, you know, so, and then being familiar with the stuff that the gay stuff that Focus on the Family has sponsored or done, or the kind of the stuff that they profess, to receive an email from someone stating, I appreciated so much this article. I love essays that really confront the messiness of these issues. And I know that you put your heart and soul in this, and they even they made mention of they're particularly sensitive towards what the lesbian community is going through right now, which was just so
That,
insane for me to kind of realize. And I'm like, and I responded, I said, thank you so much. And a few years ago, I never would have thought that I would be receiving a message of appreciation from someone. He's like, yeah, this,
yeah.
it's crazy times, and it's really interesting. And so, it's kind of, I don't know. I mean, to me, in my little life, that's just evidence that if we share our stories honestly and openly, that like there can be bridges, you know, that are a few years ago. I mean, I would have, I've been chanting like death to focus on the family, down with, focus on the family. I mean, I got all my news from HuffPost, all my opinions from HuffPost, and from, like it was just, I just filtered everything through and just would parrot what was said to me. But, once I found myself kind of in the hotbed of where all of these ideas, not just, well, originate and also are, uh, you know, engineered. And it was like, I'm, talk about privilege. I was extremely privileged to have that experience because I don't know where I would be intellectually, spiritually, mentally, if I hadn't been able to go to Columbia and to um, learn, because I certainly got an education there, but also to talk back or to think back at least some of the things that I was just being told to accept at face value.
well, what are your plans now? Where do you go from here?
Honestly, I was, I was in an MFA program. I left it because I encountered the same culture that I had encountered at Columbia. I was hopeful and optimistic that it would be different, and it wasn't. So I left that program, and I thought about doing journalism school. But now I'm just going to work, hopefully write some more,
Hmm.
um, and and go from there, and kind of just steer clear of academia for a little while.
Most of the really smart people I know are doing the same thing. It's a hostile environment for like intellectuals right now. It's strange to say, but the academies are hostile to intellectuals, and gay men are getting letters from Focus on the Family. Compliment. The world is completely upside down. It's
Mm-hmm.
chaos.
Mm-hmm.
um, your story was very heartfelt and well written. It was so powerful. I'm honored to have you on to talk about it. I am probably going to be processing for a couple hours after this of the experience of getting to sit here and I don't talk with you about I think it's more powerful than you think, and I'm glad it's having the effect that it's having.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate that.
And I
Thanks
hope
for.
you are a inspiration or example or model for other people to start telling their stories of whatever background, because we do need that.
Yeah, I mean, I need it. I mean, yes, if I can inspire other people to do that, absolutely, because I need it. You know, I need other people's stories. I need to hear people. I don't want that well to run dry.
We were all sitting for a year on lockdown with social media, like with Twitter. We were all sitting in front of Twitter, and then George Floyd happened, and that was social media in action right there, and it's been ever since. And that's kind of what. So a lot of people I talked to were having these isolated epiphanies, like you and I were alone, and then we start talking to others, and we realize there's very similar, if not identical, patterns to the stuff we're reacting to and observing, and the conclusions we're all drawing from it. And the more people I see come together and share those stories and kind of compare notes and put their collective experience together, I think that's at least a start. Like if we can get more people doing that. I'm going to a thing tomorrow with Braver Angels where they teach you how to have conversation, like, because I'm kind of on the taunting side too. I want to learn how to get. I don't have a lot of patience or tolerance for the woke, so I want to get better at maybe. I'd love to get one of them on the podcast at one point. So some of the techniques they talk about at this workshop sound very similar to some of the stuff you talked about today. So there's organizations and groups out there, I think, that are trying to foster this. And thank you for coming and doing this for us. Is there anything you want to close with or share or leave for our viewers?
No, I mean, that's great. I've heard a little bit about Braver Angels, and read about them. I think that they're a great organization, bridging political divides. Also, there's FAIR, now, which is the Foundation Against.
I think it's fairforall.org is the address.
Right.
And
And it's fighting racism and discrimination. You know, I guess in a traditional liberal sense. And I think that they're doing really great things as well. Yeah, so that's cool. Thanks so much for having me on. I really appreciate it.
it was an honor, and you're welcome back anytime. I hope you stay connected and let us know how we can help.
I will.